When Keanu Reeves saw Sandra laugh again, his whisper was caught on camera. The rain had just stopped outside the small cafe where Keanu sat alone by the window. His black coat was wet, his eyes distant, and his coffee untouched. There was a quiet sadness about him, something the world could never see in his movies or interviews. Fame had given him everything, recognition, wealth, respect, but had quietly taken something precious in return. Peace. He stared at the reflection in the glass, and for a moment, he saw her. Sandra Bullock, not the actress the world adored, but the woman who once sat beside him on long, silent drives, both too tired from shooting but too comfortable to need words. She used to laugh easily then. Now it had been years since he'd heard that sound. Her real laugh, not the polite one she gave to the cameras. He whispered to himself, "Where did we lose it, Sandy?" His voice trembled slightly. He wasn't sure if he meant the friendship, the moments, or the time itself. The cafe door opened with a soft chime. The air shifted and Keanu turned instinctively. A familiar silhouette stood there, holding a book and smiling politely at the waiter. It was her, Sandra. For a second, his heart stopped. Not because he didn't expect to see her, but because she looked different. There was warmth in her eyes, but also a quiet distance, as if life had taught her how to hide pain gracefully. She noticed him too. Their eyes met. Neither spoke. Instead, she gave him that small, knowing smile, the same one she gave when the cameras stopped rolling after emotional scenes. The one that said, "I understand more than you think." She walked over slowly, her boots softly tapping the wooden floor. "I thought you didn't drink coffee anymore," she said gently, sitting across from him without waiting for permission. Keanu smiled faintly. "I don't. I just needed somewhere to sit." The waiter came by, recognized them both, and froze. Keanu raised a hand kindly. "It's okay. We're just old friends catching up." When the waiter left, Sandra leaned forward. "It's been years." "Too many," Keanu said quietly. "How are you holding up?" She exhaled softly, looking down at her hands. "Some days are easier than others. Hollywood doesn't exactly let you grow old quietly." He smiled gently. "Maybe that's why I stay away." She laughed once under her breath. "You always were better at disappearing than anyone I knew." He looked at her, his gaze steady but kind. "And you were always better at pretending you were fine when you weren't." The words hung in the air, heavy and real. Sandra looked up, caught off guard. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Instead, she looked away, her eyes glistening faintly. For a moment, the noise of the cafe faded. It was just them, their shared silence louder than any conversation. Finally, she said softly, "I lost someone last year." Keanu's expression changed immediately, his usual calm breaking into quiet empathy. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "It wasn't sudden," she continued. "It was just slow, and it reminded me of all the people I stopped reaching out to. People who once mattered." Keanu nodded, his throat tight. "You mean people like me?" Sandra smiled faintly. "Maybe. But you didn't exactly make it easy to find you either." He chuckled lightly. "Touché." For a few minutes they just sat, two old souls carrying too many unspoken memories. Then Sandra suddenly asked, "Do you remember the last time we really laughed together?" Keanu leaned back, thinking. "The bus scene. You kept saying the line wrong just to make me lose focus." She smiled. "It worked, didn't it?" "It did," he said softly. "And you looked so free that day. I remember thinking maybe we'll stay like this forever, happy, simple, untouched by all this." Her smile faded gently. "But forever doesn't happen for people like us, does it?" He looked at her carefully, then said in a low voice, "Maybe it can, if we stop running from the things that still make us human." Her eyes met his again, and something in her expression shifted, like a locked door opening just a little. "Keanu," she said softly, "you always speak like someone who's still searching for peace." "That's because I am," he replied. "And maybe seeing you again is part of finding it." She didn't respond right away. She just smiled, a fragile, hesitant smile that carried years of untold emotions. Then the unexpected happened. A young girl sitting near their table dropped her sketchbook. and a few pages fluttered toward them. Keanu bent down to pick one up. On the page was a pencil drawing. Two people sitting at a cafe window, smiling at each other. The girl blushed and said shyly, "I like drawing strangers who seem kind." Keanu handed the sketch back gently and said, "Thank you. Kindness is the best thing to notice." When the girl left, Sandra looked at him quietly. "You're still the same, aren't you?" "Maybe," he said. "But I think I'm learning to smile again." She tilted her head slightly. "And maybe I'm learning to laugh again." The light outside softened. The rain had cleared completely now, and the city shimmered under the setting sun. Keanu watched her as she smiled genuinely, this time not for the cameras, not for the world, but for the moment. And that smile, that rare, real smile, made him whisper something he didn't plan to. "I miss this, Sandy." She looked up, eyes gentle. "Me too." The whisper was soft, barely above the sound of distant traffic. But someone nearby, a tourist filming through the cafe window, captured it accidentally. The short clip would later go viral, titled "Keanu Whispers Something Heartfelt to Sandra Bullock After Years Apart." But in that moment, neither of them knew. They just sat there surrounded by the warmth of something that felt real again, and for the first time in a long time. Sandra laughed, a quiet, full laugh that reached her eyes. Keanu looked at her, and in that laugh, he saw something healing, not just for her, but for himself, too. When Keanu Reeves saw Sandra laugh again, his whisper was caught on camera the next morning. Keanu woke up to the sound of his phone buzzing endlessly on the bedside table. It was still dark outside. He reached over lazily, his eyes half open, and noticed dozens of unread messages. "Man, you're trending everywhere," read one from his friend. Another said, "The clip of you and Sandra is all over social media." He frowned slightly, rubbing his eyes. He opened the first link and watched the short video, the one from the cafe. He saw himself leaning forward, whispering softly, and Sandra smiling in response. The caption read, "Keanu Reeves whispers something beautiful to Sandra Bullock after years apart." He sighed quietly. People were commenting things like, "They still have chemistry," and "This is the purest thing I've seen in years." Keanu smiled faintly, but then turned off his phone. He didn't want to chase attention. He only wanted peace. He stood up, looked out the window, and whispered to himself, "They'll make stories again, like they always do." Meanwhile, across the city, Sandra sat in her kitchen with a mug of tea, scrolling through her phone. She laughed softly at the same video. Her assistant had texted her, "You two just broke the internet." She smiled but shook her head. "Of course we did," she muttered, taking a sip. Leave it to the internet to turn a quiet moment into a movie scene. But deep inside, she felt something different. Something small, but alive. It wasn't about fame or the cameras. It was about the feeling she had sitting across from Keanu the day before. It felt calm, safe, real. She found herself replaying that moment when he said, "Maybe seeing you again is part of finding peace." It echoed in her head like an old song she didn't realize she missed. As the morning light grew stronger, Sandra sent him a message. "Sandra, you saw it?" Keanu, "Yeah." "It's everywhere." Sandra, "I didn't think a whisper could go viral." Keanu, "The world's been lonely. They listen for kindness now." She smiled at that line. They listen for kindness now. It felt true. Later that day, she had to attend a studio meeting. The executives, all smiling too wide, brought up the viral video almost immediately. "This kind of attention is gold, Sandra," one of them said. "If you two ever decide to work together again, the internet will explode." She gave a polite smile but didn't respond. Because inside, she wasn't thinking about publicity. She was thinking about the real conversation she and Keanu had shared, the quiet honesty between two old friends who had seen too much of the world. That evening, her phone buzzed again. It was a message from Keanu. "Keanu, want to grab a walk?" "Somewhere without cameras this time," she replied instantly. "Yes, name the place." He sent her an address. It was a small park near the outskirts of the city, hidden from the usual chaos. When she arrived, Keanu was already there, leaning on a wooden fence, feeding a stray dog with bits of bread. He smiled when he saw her. You never change, she said, walking closer. I try to, he said softly, but maybe I shouldn't anymore. They walked slowly down the path. The park was almost empty, except for the gentle sound of wind and the soft crunch of leaves under their feet. After a while, Sandra said, You know, I wasn't sure I'd ever see you again. Not like this, he nodded. Same here, but maybe the world has strange timing. Sometimes it puts the right people in the same place when they need it most. She looked at him curiously. And what do you need right now, Keanu? He paused for a moment before answering. Maybe forgiveness. Maybe to stop carrying the weight of things I can't fix. Sandra's eyes softened. You always think everything is your fault. Not everything, he said. Just the things that matter. There was a deep silence between them. A peaceful kind, not uncomfortable. Then Sandra spoke again. You know what I realized when I saw that video? What? We weren't acting anymore. Not yesterday. Not pretending. It was just us. Keanu looked at her with quiet gratitude. Maybe that's what people saw too. Something real in a world full of noise. They sat on a bench near the lake. The reflection of the city lights shimmered across the water. Sandra hugged her arms to keep warm. Keanu took off his jacket and placed it over her shoulders. You don't have to do that, she said softly. I know, he said. But I want to, she smiled faintly. You always did have this strange kindness about you. Maybe it's not strange, he said. Maybe it's just rare now. She looked at him for a long moment. Do you ever think about what could have been? Keanu didn't answer right away. He just watched the ripples on the water. Finally, he said, sometimes. But I think what was is still enough. It gave us something real, even if it didn't last forever. Sandra nodded slowly, her voice almost a whisper. You always make endings sound peaceful, because every ending is just another chance to start again, he said. She smiled at that, tears gathering in her eyes, but not from sadness. From warmth. After a while, they stood up to leave. As they walked back toward the gate, Sandra suddenly said, Keanu, if they ask about that video again, what do we tell them? He thought for a moment. Maybe we just tell them the truth. And what's that? He looked at her gently. That two people met again after years apart and remembered what it felt like to be human. She smiled softly, brushing her hair back as the wind blew. I like that. Before leaving, she turned and said, Thank you, Keanu, for yesterday. And today, he smiled. Thank you, Sandy, for laughing again. As she walked away, Keanu stayed for a moment longer, watching her fade into the quiet street. Then he looked up at the night sky, whispered to himself, some moments are too honest for the world to forget. And that night, when Sandra got home, she watched the cafe video one last time. But this time she didn't feel the weight of nostalgia. She felt peace. The kind that comes when the past finally stops hurting. When Keanu Reeves saw Sandra laugh again, his whisper was caught on camera. A week passed, and the internet's noise had begun to fade. New trends came and went, and soon the clip that once made millions smile was just another memory in the endless stream of online stories. But for Keanu and Sandra, something about that day had quietly changed the rhythm of their lives. Keanu was back in his apartment, sitting by the same window where he often read scripts but rarely accepted them. His agent had sent him 3 offers that morning, big studio films, large paychecks, but he hadn't replied. He wasn't sure why, but everything he read felt empty lately. Explosions, heroes, dramatic speeches, they all felt too loud for the silence he'd learned to appreciate. His phone buzzed. A message from Sandra. Sandra, can I tell you something? Keanu. You can tell me anything. Sandra. I think I'm scared of being forgotten. He stared at the message for a long time before replying. Keanu. No one forgets real kindness. Not ever. There was a long pause. Then another message appeared, Sandra. Then why do I feel invisible sometimes? Keanu leaned back, watching the soft light fade outside. It was evening now, and the sky was painted in pale orange and blue. He typed slowly, Keanu, because you're human, and humans fade only when they stop being honest with themselves. She didn't reply after that, but he knew she was thinking about it. Meanwhile, Sandra sat alone in her living room, scrolling through old photos, behind-the-scenes moments, movie premieres, interviews where she laughed too loudly just to hide how tired she was. She stared at one picture of her and Keanu from years ago. They were laughing between takes, both in costume, both free of the world's expectations. A quiet tear slid down her cheek. She whispered to herself, "I miss that version of me." The next day, she called him. "Hey," she said, her voice soft. "Are you busy tomorrow?" "Depends," he said. "Busy pretending or busy living?" She smiled through the phone. "The second one." "Then no," he said gently. "What's going on?" "I got invited to this small film charity event," she said. "They asked me to speak about kindness in cinema. I thought maybe you'd come with me." He was silent for a moment. "You sure about that? The cameras, the questions, all of it?" "Yeah," she said firmly. "Maybe it's time we show up, not for them, but for us." Keanu smiled faintly. "Then I'll be there." The following evening, the event hall was filled with warm light and quiet music. It wasn't a red carpet kind of night. Just small tables, filmmakers, and artists who cared more about stories than fame. Sandra arrived first, wearing a simple black dress, elegant but not loud. She looked calm, but her hands trembled slightly. A few minutes later, Keanu walked in. No entourage, no security, just him in a dark suit with a soft smile. When their eyes met across the room, something quiet passed between them. "You came?" she said as he reached her table. "I said I would," he replied. "And you look peaceful," she laughed nervously. "That's a first," the host called her name. Sandra took a deep breath, stood up, and walked toward the stage. Keanu watched her closely. When she started speaking, her voice trembled at first, but then grew stronger. "We live in a world that loves stories of power," she began, "but the stories that stay are the ones about kindness, about moments that don't make headlines but make hearts feel something." The audience listened intently. "Years ago," she continued, "I worked with someone who reminded me that silence can be powerful too, that you don't have to speak loudly to change someone's life. Sometimes, just listening is enough." Keanu looked down for a second, realizing she was talking about him. "Kindness isn't about being perfect," she said. "It's about showing up even when you're tired, forgiving even when no one's watching, and sometimes it's about laughing again after you forgot how." There was a quiet pause. The room was still. Even the lights seemed softer. When she finished, the audience gave gentle applause, not loud, not forced, just warm. As she stepped down from the stage, Keanu stood and met her halfway. "You did good," he said softly. She smiled. "You always say that?" "Because it's always true," he replied. They sat back down, and for a while, the conversation faded into the background. She looked at him and whispered, "You know that speech wasn't about me." "I know," he said. "But it healed you anyway," she smiled. "Maybe it did." Then a journalist approached politely. "Mr. Reeves, Miss Bullock, can I get a quick photo?" Keanu looked at Sandra, and she nodded. They stood close, smiling, not the polished smiles of actors, but real ones. As the camera clicked, Keanu whispered, "You see? You're not invisible." She looked at him, eyes soft. "Not when you're standing next to me." The flash went off. The photo would later circulate again online. People saying, "Look how real they look. Look at their eyes." But beyond the noise, what no one knew was what happened right after. After the event ended, they slipped out quietly through the side door. Outside, a cool breeze moved through the night. Sandra leaned on the railing and said, "You know what scares me?" "What?" "That I'll start feeling happy again, and then lose it." Keanu turned toward her and said gently, "Happiness isn't something you lose. It's something you notice, even if it's just for a second." She smiled through her tears. "You always make it sound so easy." "It's not," he said softly. "But it's worth trying." She nodded. "Maybe that's what I'll do then, try." Keanu smiled. "That's all anyone can do." As they stood there, the city lights reflected faintly in their eyes. Neither of them said anything more. They didn't need to. And for the second time in years, Sandra laughed again, quietly, freely, without reason. Keanu looked at her and thought, this is what peace looks like. When Keanu Reeves saw Sandra laugh again, his whisper was caught on camera. The days that followed the charity event were calm, almost strangely peaceful. Both Keanu and Sandra found themselves thinking about life in quieter ways. No red carpets, no cameras, just ordinary days that felt more honest than anything they'd experienced in years. For Keanu, morning started earlier now. He would take his motorcycle out before sunrise just to feel the wind brush against his face. The world still half asleep. Sometimes he would stop by the same cafe where everything began, the one where he and Sandra first met again. The waiter always smiled when he walked in. "Back to the same seat, sir?" Keanu would smile faintly. "Yeah, it's a good view." But what he didn't say was that he came there because he could still hear Sandra's laugh echoing faintly in that corner. It wasn't about the coffee. It was about the feeling. Meanwhile, Sandra was working quietly on a small, independent project, something personal. It wasn't a big studio film. It was a story about loss, friendship, and second chances. She wasn't acting this time. She was producing. For once, she wanted to create something that didn't depend on glamour, but on truth, and she had one person in mind for the role that mattered most. She picked up her phone and typed, "Sandra, I have a role for you, Keanu." "Oh? Should I be scared?" "Sandra, maybe a little. It's not action or sci-fi. It's just real." "Keanu." "Then I'm listening." A few hours later, she sent him the script. The title was Before We Forget to Smile. It was about two people who meet again after years apart and slowly learn how to live without pretending. When Keanu finished reading it, he sat silently for a while. The story felt painfully familiar. He called her. "You wrote us into this, didn't you?" She laughed softly. "A little. But it's not about us. It's about what happens when people finally stop running from what they feel." He smiled through the phone. "You sure you're ready to make something that personal?" She paused for a moment. "Maybe not. But I think it's time." And just like that, they agreed to do it. No studio pressure, no marketing teams, just two friends telling a story that felt real. Weeks passed as they began the small production. The crew was minimal. They filmed mostly in natural light, in quiet places, an old house near a lake, a park bench at dusk, and sometimes even the cafe where their real story had started. During one scene, the script asked for Sandra's character to cry silently while Keanu's character just sat beside her saying nothing. It was supposed to be simple. But when the camera started rolling, something unexpected happened. Sandra began to cry for real, not acting, not rehearsed. Her hands trembled slightly, her voice breaking. "Cut," the director whispered softly. But Keanu shook his head. "Let it be," he said quietly. He reached out, held her hand, and whispered just one line that wasn't in the script. "It's okay, Sandy. You don't have to act this one." She looked at him, tears still running down her face, and whispered back, "I know." The camera kept rolling, catching the raw truth between them. No one spoke when the scene ended. Everyone on set felt it, the kind of silence that means something real just happened. Later, when Sandra watched the playback, she smiled softly. "That was the first honest moment I've had on camera in years," she said. Keanu looked at her quietly. Maybe that's the only kind worth keeping. Days turned into weeks, and the small project became something bigger. Not in scale, but in emotion. Every scene carried a quiet depth that neither of them had planned. Between takes, they'd talk, not about fame or success, but about things they never said before. Regrets, fears, what it meant to live simply. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, they sat on the porch of the lake house used for filming. The air smelled like pine and water. Sandra leaned back and said softly, "You know, I used to think happiness was this big, loud thing. Awards, applause, all that noise. And now?" Keanu asked. "Now I think it's this," she said. "Quiet, honest, fragile." He nodded slowly. "Fragile things are worth protecting," she smiled. "You always talk like a philosopher, you know that?" "Maybe because life taught me slow," he said. The fast parts were never real anyway. She looked at him for a long time, her expression soft but unreadable. You think we'll ever make peace with the past? Keanu thought for a while before replying. Maybe peace isn't something we make. Maybe it's something that happens when we stop trying to fix what's already beautiful in its broken way. For a moment, she just stared at him, her eyes full, her voice quiet. You say the kind of things people remember? Then I hope they remember this, he said. Because tomorrow's not promised, but this moment is. That night, after everyone left the set, Keanu stayed behind. He walked by the lake, watching the ripples under the moonlight. The world was silent, but his heart felt calm. His phone buzzed. It was a message from Sandra. Sandra, thank you for today. Not just for acting, but for being real. Keanu, that's the only way I know how to be with you. Sandra, then don't ever change. Keanu, I won't. Not if it means you'll keep laughing. He put his phone down and looked up at the sky. And somewhere deep in the quiet, he realized something, that the laughter he had missed for so long wasn't just hers. It was his too. When Keanu Reeves saw Sandra laugh again, his whisper was caught on camera. The filming had ended 2 weeks ago, but the echoes of it still lived inside both of them. The movie, Before We Forget to Smile, had started as a small personal project, but word had quietly spread through the industry. Independent critics who saw early clips called it raw, emotional, and disarmingly human. Keanu and Sandra didn't expect any of that. They had made it for themselves, not the world. But sometimes, the most honest things have a way of finding the people who need them most. Still, something strange happened after filming ended. Sandra started feeling restless. She'd wake up in the middle of the night, her heart racing for no reason. She didn't understand why. It wasn't fear. It was more like a quiet emptiness that came after finishing something beautiful. She sent Keanu a message one morning, Sandra. Do you ever feel like you lose a part of yourself after something ends? Keanu. Yeah. Endings feel like silence after music. Sandra. How do you handle it? Keanu. I don't fight it. I let the silence play for a while. She stared at that message for a long time. That evening, she drove without thinking. Her car followed a road she hadn't taken in years, the same one that led to the lake house where they had filmed. The air smelled of rain. The world quiet again. When she arrived, she saw a motorcycle parked by the edge of the path. Her heart skipped a beat. She already knew who it belonged to. Keanu was sitting near the lake, his hair slightly wet from the drizzle, staring at the water as if it were a mirror to his thoughts. You always find the quiet places, she said softly as she walked toward him. He turned, smiled faintly. And you always find me there. They sat beside each other without another word. The rain was soft, barely touching the surface of the lake. After a long pause, Sandra said quietly, I keep thinking about that last scene we filmed, the one where we just sat in silence. The one that wasn't in the script? Keanu asked. She nodded. Yeah, it felt like closure, but now I'm not sure it was. He looked at her carefully. What do you mean? I don't know, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Maybe I just don't want it to end. Not the film, not this, whatever this is. Keanu didn't look away. His eyes softened, the way they always did when he understood something without needing words. You know what I think? He said quietly. We spend so much time trying to make things last forever. But maybe the good things are supposed to end slowly, so they stay real. She smiled sadly. You make it sound beautiful, even when it hurts. He chuckled softly. Because pain means it mattered. For a few moments, neither spoke. The sound of raindrops on leaves filled the silence. Then Sandra whispered, You ever wonder why we met again after all these years? Yeah, he said. But I don't think it was by chance. Maybe life waits for us to be ready before it brings certain people back. She looked down, her hands clasped together. You really think so? I know so, he said gently. You wouldn't have laughed the way you did in the cafe if it happened sooner. That made her smile through the tears forming in her eyes. You remember everything, don't you? Only the things that matter, he said softly. She looked at him for a long moment, then whispered, You changed me, Keanu. He shook his head. No, you found yourself. I just reminded you who you were. The rain began to fall a little harder. Keanu stood up, took off his jacket, and held it over both of them. They stood close under it, barely inches apart. We're going to get soaked, she said, laughing quietly. Maybe we need it, he said. Rain washes away what words can't. Sandra looked up at him then, her eyes reflecting the soft gray sky. There was something unspoken between them, something deeper than friendship, quieter than love, but just as powerful. After a long silence, she said, You know, people think the cafe video was a love story. Keanu smiled. Maybe it was, just not the kind they expected. And what kind is it? The kind where two people learn to care again. That's rare enough. She smiled gently. You always make the complicated sound simple. It's only simple when it's true, he said. The rain finally began to slow. The sky brightened slightly, a pale golden light breaking through the clouds. Sandra looked at it and whispered, It's beautiful. Yeah, Keanu said quietly. And you're laughing again. She turned to him, surprised, and realized she was. Her shoulders relaxed, her smile soft and genuine. They walked along the edge of the lake, the air fresh and cool. You know what's strange? She said after a while. For years, I thought I needed to be seen by the world. Now I just want to be understood by one person. Keanu smiled. Maybe that's what we all want, to be understood, even in silence. As they reached the end of the path, Sandra stopped and looked at him. If this story ever ends, promise me you'll remember it as something good. He nodded slowly. I already do. They stood there for a moment longer before Sandra whispered, Thank you for showing up that day at the cafe. Thank you for laughing again, he said softly. She smiled, her eyes filled with warmth. I didn't just laugh, Keanu. I lived again. He looked at her quietly, then whispered something she barely heard. That's all I ever wanted. The sky cleared completely now, the lake shimmering under soft light. It felt like the world itself had exhaled after holding its breath. And as they stood there in the quiet peace of that moment, neither of them noticed that another passerby, walking by the road above, had taken a photo. Two silhouettes under one jacket, standing by a lake in the rain. That picture would later circle the internet again. People would say it looked like a scene from a movie. But for them, it was real. When Keanu Reeves saw Sandra laugh again, his whisper was caught on camera. The photo from the lake spread across social media within hours. Not because they had posted it, someone else had. Just like before, the world had caught a quiet, private moment between two people who never asked for attention, but somehow always drew it. News outlets called it a reunion written by fate. Fans began sharing old clips of their movies together, their interviews, their laughter. And yet, despite all the noise, Keanu and Sandra said nothing. They didn't deny it, didn't explain it. They just went on living quietly. Still, the world had changed for them. One evening, Sandra sat on her porch, scrolling through the comments under that photo. There were thousands of messages, people talking about second chances, about friendship, about kindness. She smiled softly, realizing that their simple story had reminded people that not every connection needs a label. Her phone buzzed. Keanu. You saw it? Sandra. Yeah. I guess we're trending again. Keanu. Maybe the universe just likes our timing. Sandra. Or maybe it wants to remind people that peace still exists. She laughed quietly, typing back. You and your wisdom, he replied. Someone has to balance your sarcasm. They both laughed at the same time, though miles apart. Somehow, that shared laughter felt as real as sitting side by side. The next day, Sandra had a small interview scheduled for a charity cause. The host, gentle and respectful, eventually asked about the photo. "People see you and Keanu together again and call it a love story. What would you say it really is?" Sandra smiled. "It's a story about kindness, about remembering that. Sometimes the people who walk back into your life aren't there to change it. They're there to remind you that it still has meaning." The host paused, visibly moved. "That's beautiful." "It's true," she said softly. "We forget how powerful simple things are. Listening, showing up, laughing again. Keanu reminded me of that." Meanwhile, Keanu was across the city, walking his dog in the park. A small group of fans approached him, polite and hesitant. One of them, a young boy, handed him a letter. "My mom said your stories helped her smile again after she lost my dad," the boy said. Keanu knelt down, his voice gentle. "Tell your mom she's stronger than she knows. And thank you for reminding me why kindness matters." The boy grinned, and Keanu smiled back. Later that evening, Keanu met Sandra at a quiet rooftop cafe. The sky was a deep blue, fading into gold as the sun set behind the city skyline. "You know," Sandra said as she looked at the view, "I used to think our best days were behind us." "And now?" he asked. "Now I think maybe they're happening right now, just differently." He nodded. "Peaceful doesn't mean boring. It means earned." She smiled. "You always say things like that. Simple. But it hits." "That's because truth doesn't need big words," he said softly. For a long moment, they both watched the sunset. The world around them faded, the noise, the rumors, the headlines. There was only silence, the kind that felt full instead of empty. Then Sandra turned to him. "What if this is the last time we meet like this, not because something happens, but because life just moves on?" Keanu looked at her, his eyes steady and calm. "Then we'll carry it right. Some memories are strong enough to walk beside you forever." She smiled through her tears. "You always make endings sound gentle." "Because they are," he whispered. "If they're made of gratitude." She reached out and took his hand. No cameras, no audience, just two old souls who had seen too much of the world and still chose softness. After a while, he said quietly, "You taught me something, Sandy." "What's that?" "That healing doesn't come from forgetting. It comes from forgiving yourself for the years you couldn't laugh." Her voice broke a little. "And you taught me that kindness can be stronger than distance." They both smiled. The first stars began to appear in the sky. The lights of the city shimmered below, reflecting in their eyes. They didn't say goodbye. They didn't need to. Instead, Sandra said softly, "Promise me one thing. Anything. Never stop showing up for people who need a little light." He smiled faintly. "Only if you promise to keep laughing." "Deal," she whispered. They sat there quietly as the night took over, the air filled with peace and the soft hum of the city below. And somewhere in that stillness, the camera of life captured one last moment, two people who had once been broken by the world, now whole in their own gentle way. Weeks later, the small film Before We Forget to Smile released quietly online. No marketing, no interviews, just an upload on a simple channel. Within days, it spread like light. Millions watched it, cried, and wrote about how it made them believe again, in kindness, in friendship, in quiet love that doesn't need to be loud to be real. But Keanu and Sandra never spoke about it again. They didn't need to. They had lived it.